I still remember the smell of disinfectant in the air, the cold metal chair beneath me, and the faint sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway. My wife sat beside me, her hands neatly folded on her lap, her eyes fixed on the floor. We had come for what I thought was a routine checkup, nothing urgent, just a precaution after a few weeks of her feeling a little off. The doctor walked in with a clipboard in his hand and a polite smile on his face. He asked her a few questions, checked her blood pressure, listened to her breathing. I answered when she stayed quiet, filling in the details. At first, everything seemed normal. But then, he paused. He looked at her, really looked at her, like he was searching for something in her expression. His eyes stayed on hers for a long moment, and in that silence, I felt an odd tension in the room. He didn't write anything down, didn't speak right away. Just that gaze, as if an unspoken message had passed between them. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but deliberate. "You're going to need to pay closer attention to what's happening at home," he said, his eyes flicking briefly in my direction before returning to her. My wife nodded slowly, but she didn't look at me. I didn't understand what he meant. I thought he was talking about diet, stress, maybe the need for more rest. But deep down, something in my gut told me that moment had shifted something I couldn't quite name yet. The moment stretched longer than it should have. That quiet, heavy pause after his words seemed to wrap around the room like a thick fog. The doctor's eyes lingered on my wife as if he knew something I didn't. There was no warmth in that gaze, only a kind of measured concern, almost like he was assessing her reaction more than her health. She nodded again, still without looking at me, her lips pressed together as if holding back words. My instinct was to break the silence, to ask what exactly he meant, but something about his demeanor made me hesitate. It was as though the conversation wasn't meant to include me. When he finally glanced in my direction, it was quick, almost reluctant. His smile was polite, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Make sure you both take care of each other," he said. And then, without another word, he scribbled something on his clipboard and left the room. I turned to my wife, expecting her to explain. Instead, she picked up her purse, stood, and said, "Let's go." Her voice was flat, almost mechanical. That look between them, it stayed with me. I didn't know why, but it felt like the first crack in a wall I thought was solid. The ride home was quiet. Too quiet. I kept replaying that moment in my mind, the way the doctor's gaze seemed to pass between us like a secret I wasn't allowed to hear. My wife stared out the window the entire time, her reflection in the glass looking almost like a stranger's. I wanted to ask, what was that about? But something told me she wouldn't give me a straight answer. It wasn't just her silence, it was the way her jaw tightened whenever I glanced her way, as if she was preparing herself for a conversation she didn't want to have. At one point, I caught her sighing, so faintly I almost missed it. It was the kind of sigh that carries more than exhaustion, it carried a decision. That unsettled me. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to ignore the knot in my chest. Every mile we drove, the distance between us felt wider than the road itself. I couldn't shake the feeling that the doctor had planted something in her mind, a thought, a doubt, maybe even a judgment about me. And whatever it was, it had taken root instantly. Halfway home, she finally spoke. But it wasn't what I expected. "You know, sometimes I think people see things more clearly from the outside," she said, her voice calm, almost casual, like she was testing the water before diving in. I glanced at her, searching her face for meaning. "What do you mean by that?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she kept her eyes on the passing streets, the shadows of trees sliding across her skin like fleeting thoughts. Then she said, "The doctor, he just made me realize some things." I felt my chest tighten. "What kind of things?" Her lips curved in the faintest, almost bitter smile. "Things about us." It was like a blade had slid silently between my ribs. We had left the clinic with no new diagnosis, no medication, just this cryptic cloud hanging over us. I wanted to press her, to force the truth out of her, but something told me that whatever she had decided in that doctor's office, it wasn't going to be undone by a car ride home. So I stayed silent, but inside, My mind was already racing toward 1,000 possibilities, none of them good. That night, the house felt different. It wasn't anything you could see, no new shadows, no strange sounds, but the air carried a tension that wrapped itself around me. My wife moved through the rooms with a quiet efficiency, like she was following a plan only she knew. We ate dinner in near silence. I tried to start a conversation, about work, the weather, anything, but her answers were clipped, polite, and final. It was as if every word was measured, each one just enough to end the exchange. Later, I found her sitting at the edge of our bed, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up when I walked in. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine," she said quickly. Too quickly. I sat beside her, close enough to feel the warmth of her arm but far enough to sense the space she was deliberately creating. That's when it hit me, this wasn't just a mood. This was a shift. Something had changed in her, and it started in that doctor's office. And the worst part? I didn't know if it was about her health, or about me. The next morning, I woke up to a voice I'd barely recognized. It wasn't louder or sharper, if anything, it was quieter, but it carried an edge that hadn't been there before. She asked me to pass her the coffee mug, but the request came with a flatness, a detachment, as though I were a stranger at her kitchen table. When I tried to tell her about a news story I'd read, she responded with a single word, not even looking up from her cup. It wasn't just her words, it was the way she delivered them. The warmth I'd always taken for granted was gone, replaced by something deliberate. Every syllable seemed filtered, as if she were carefully controlling what she let slip out. I caught her watching me once, mid-morning. Her eyes didn't soften when they met mine, they simply observed, as though she were cataloging my behavior for some unspoken reason. And for the first time in years, I felt the smallest flicker of fear, not fear of her, but fear of what she might already believe about me. It started small, so small I almost missed it. One evening, as I was loading the dishwasher, she stood behind me and said, "You always put the plates in the wrong way." Her tone wasn't playful, it was matter-of-fact, like she was pointing out a flaw that had been there forever but was only now worth mentioning. The next day, it was the way I folded the laundry. "You don't even try to do it neatly," she said, shaking her head as she refolded the shirt I'd just put away. At first, I brushed it off. Every couple has moments like this, right? But soon the comments became more frequent. The way I spoke to the neighbor. The way I laughed at a joke on TV. Even the way I walked into a room seemed to warrant a remark. They weren't outright insults. No, they were quieter than that, delivered with the kind of precision that makes you question yourself without realizing it. And somewhere deep inside, I began to wonder if she was collecting evidence for something I couldn't yet see. It didn't take long for the small criticisms to grow into full conversations, no, interrogations. One Saturday morning, over coffee, she told me, "You've been different lately. More impatient. More dismissive." The words landed like a verdict, not an observation. I tried to defend myself. "I've been the same as always. If I've seemed distracted, it's because things have been busy at work." She shook her head slowly, almost pityingly. "You don't see it. But other people notice. They notice how you are." That last part stopped me. Other people. Who were these other people? Was she talking about the doctor? Friends? Family? Someone else entirely? I asked her directly, but she only gave me that faint, knowing smile, the kind that makes you feel like you're already guilty of something you haven't done. From that moment on, every disagreement, no matter how small, circled back to the same accusation, my behavior. And each time she said it, I felt less like her husband and more like a suspect under constant observation. The walls of our house hadn't moved, but it felt like we were living miles apart. She began spending more time in the guest room, at first under the excuse of reading where it's quieter, then later without giving any reason at all. Meals were no longer shared at the table, she'd take hers to the living room, leaving me to eat alone with the dull hum of the refrigerator as company. Even the way she moved around me changed. If I reached for something in the kitchen while she was there, she would step aside quickly, almost too quickly, as if avoiding contact. Passing each other in the hallway became an awkward dance of sidestepping and silence. The laughter that used to echo through our evenings had vanished. In its place was a polite, icy civility that felt more suffocating than open hostility. I could be in the same room with her and still feel like I was shouting across a canyon. And in those quiet stretches of separation, I began to fear that whatever had started in that doctor's office had already done its damage, and I was powerless to stop it. Nights became the hardest. We still shared the same bed, but it no longer felt like a place of comfort. She would lie on her side, facing away from me, the space between us wide enough to feel like an ocean. The small, familiar gestures were gone. No goodnight, no gentle touch, no sleepy murmur in the dark. Just silence. I could hear her breathing, steady, distant, like a metronome marking the passage of a night I couldn't wait to escape. Sometimes I would try to start a conversation, even about trivial things. "Did you see the mail today? I was thinking of fixing that leaky faucet tomorrow." But my words would hang in the air unanswered, or get a short, clipped reply that ended the exchange before it began. It wasn't anger that kept her quiet. It was something worse, indifference. And lying there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, I began to wonder how much longer we could go on pretending that this was still a marriage. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday evening. I was sorting through the day's mail at the kitchen counter when she walked in, her expression unreadable. She stood there for a moment, as if deciding whether to speak at all. Then, without looking at me, she said, "You know, the doctor was right." My hands froze on the stack of envelopes. Right about what? She finally met my eyes, and there was no hesitation in her voice. "About you being part of the problem." It was as if the floor had dropped out from under me. "What are you talking about?" "He never said that to me." Her gaze hardened. He didn't have to. I could see it in the way he looked at us. He could tell. I stood there, stunned, the air thick between us. I wanted to demand details, to argue, to shout, but all I could do was whisper, "The problem with what?" She shrugged lightly, as though the specifics didn't matter. "With us. With me. With how things have been for years." And just like that, the mystery I'd been trying to unravel since that day at the clinic suddenly had a name. The days that followed were a blur of conversations that felt less like discussions and more like court proceedings, me on the stand, her as judge and jury. She accused me of being controlling, of never truly listening, of making her feel small in ways I couldn't even remember. "You dismiss my feelings," she said one night, her voice cold but steady. "You make everything about you." I searched my memory, trying to match her words with moments in our past. I could recall disagreements, yes. Every couple has them. But the way she described it, I wasn't just a flawed husband, I was a constant source of harm. When I asked for examples, she gave vague, distant memories, often twisting small misunderstandings into proof of a pattern. "Remember when you didn't want to go to that dinner with my friends? That's what I mean. You've always put your comfort above mine." It was like watching our life together being rewritten in real time, each page altered to fit a story where I was the villain. And no matter how much I tried to defend myself, I could see in her eyes that the verdict had already been decided. It's a strange thing, realizing that the person who once saw the best in you now only sees the worst. Every look she gave me carried a quiet accusation. Every sigh felt like a verdict. I began to second-guess everything, my tone, my words, even the way I moved around the house. If I spoke up, I was defensive. If I stayed quiet, I was withholding. There was no right move, no safe ground. The memories of our good years, birthdays, road trips, late-night talks, started to fade under the weight of her new narrative. She didn't remember the man who held her through loss, who worked late to give us stability, who tried, really tried, to make her happy. That man didn't exist in her eyes anymore. Instead, I was the problem. The root cause. The flaw in her life she'd only just recognized but now couldn't unsee. And the worst part? I started to wonder if maybe she was right. When things began to spiral, I reached out to the people I thought would help: friends, family, anyone who had known us for years. I expected them to listen, maybe remind her of who I really was, to vouch for the life we had built together. But the responses were different. Some nodded politely, their eyes sliding away, as if my pain made them uncomfortable. Others gave vague, non-committal words: "I'm sure you two will figure it out," before changing the subject. A few, the ones I thought were truly in our corner, surprised me most. They had already spoken to her. They'd already heard her version. And from the careful way they chose their words, I could tell they believed it more than they believed me. I had always assumed that when you hit a rough patch, the people closest to you would form a net to catch you. Instead, I felt like I had stepped onto a stage alone, with no one in the audience willing to clap, no matter what I said. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just losing my wife. I was losing the world around her, too. With no one left to turn to, I began keeping more to myself. The evenings felt endless, each hour stretching into the next with only my thoughts for company. I found myself replaying old conversations, searching for the moment I had supposedly crossed some invisible line. I dug through memories like a man sifting through ashes, hoping to find something intact, proof that I hadn't been the monster she now believed me to be. But the more I searched, the more the memories felt tainted. It was as if her accusations had retroactively stained them. Some nights, I'd sit in the dark living room long after she'd gone to bed, staring at the framed photos on the wall. Smiling faces. Arms around each other. Moments that once felt unshakable. And I'd ask myself, was any of it real? Or had I just been blind the whole time? The silence in the house grew heavier, pressing against me like a weight I couldn't lift. And in that silence, a thought began to creep in: maybe the only way to find answers was to go back to where this all began. Back to the doctor. I made the appointment without telling her. Part of me felt guilty, like I was sneaking behind her back. But another part, the part that was tired of drowning in unanswered questions, knew it was the only way. When I walked into the clinic, the same faint smell of disinfectant greeted me, along with the same receptionist who didn't seem to recognize me. Sitting in that waiting room felt like stepping back into the moment everything started. The doctor came in, glancing at his notes before looking up at me. "Your wife's not with you today?" he asked. "No," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I came to talk to you about that day." His expression shifted, just slightly, but I caught it. A flicker of caution, maybe even discomfort. "I'm not sure what you mean," he said carefully. I leaned forward. "You looked at her. You said something that changed the way she sees me. I need to know what you meant." For a moment, he just studied me, the same way he had studied her. And then, with a sigh, he said, "Sometimes, mister, people hear what they're already looking for." It wasn't an answer. But it was enough to tell me that the truth was going to be far messier than I'd imagined. The doctor didn't give me details, at least not in the way I'd hoped. But as he spoke, pieces began to fall into place. He told me my wife had come to see him alone a few weeks before that appointment. She'd mentioned feeling anxious, unsettled, and, this part stung, unhappy in her marriage. She hadn't accused me of anything specific, but she'd painted a picture of a man who didn't understand her, who made her feel small without realizing it. He admitted that when he saw us together, he was observing our dynamic. He claimed he hadn't meant to imply I was the problem, only that relationships can be a factor in someone's mental and emotional health. But I knew how she would have taken that. She had already walked into that room with her mind half made up. His glance, his tone, it was the confirmation she'd been waiting for. And suddenly, the shift made sense. She hadn't started doubting me because of the doctor. She had gone to the doctor because she was already doubting me. That realization cut deeper than anything else. That evening, I walked into the house carrying the weight of what I'd learned. She was in the kitchen, slicing vegetables, the steady rhythm of the knife against the cutting board filling the air. "I went to see the doctor today," I said, my voice calm but deliberate. She froze for a split second, just enough for me to notice, before resuming her chopping. Why would you do that? I needed answers, I replied. I know you spoke to him before that appointment. I know you told him you were unhappy. And I know you've been looking at me differently ever since. She set the knife down slowly and turned to face me. There was no denial in her eyes, only a quiet resolve. I had to talk to someone. I didn't think you'd listen. I would have listened, I said, my voice cracking despite my effort to stay steady. All you had to do was tell me. Her shoulders lifted in a small, almost indifferent shrug. It's not just about telling you. It's about how I feel when I do. And with that, I understood, she hadn't been waiting for me to fix things. She had already decided they were broken. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of her breathing beside me. We were inches apart, but it felt like we existed in different worlds. I thought about the years we had shared, the laughter, the plans, the quiet moments that once felt unshakable. I also thought about the past few months, the coldness, the accusations, the way she seemed to be building a case against me in her mind. I realized something painful. I could spend the rest of my life trying to prove my worth to her, trying to rewrite the story she had already told herself, and it still might never be enough. By morning, the decision had settled in my chest like a stone. I told her I couldn't live like this anymore, that love without trust is just a slow kind of cruelty. Her expression didn't change much. She just nodded, as if she'd been waiting for me to say it. Walking out of that house was the hardest thing I've ever done. But staying would have been harder. Leaving wasn't the end, it was the beginning of understanding. In the quiet that followed, I realized that love is more than shared memories or time spent together. It's about believing in each other, even when the light is dim and the road is unclear. Trust, once it's broken, it doesn't just crack, it shatters. And sometimes, no matter how carefully you try to piece it back together, the shape is never the same. I learned that you can love someone deeply and still have to walk away. That protecting your heart isn't selfish, it's survival. And that silence, though painful, can sometimes speak louder than all the words you ever wanted to hear. If you've ever been in a place where love turned cold, where trust slipped quietly through your fingers, you're not alone. My story is just one of many. And if you've made it this far into the video, I'd truly appreciate it if you could like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts or your own experience, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next story. Your support means more than you know.